Hey guys, back with another video, and today I figured we could speculate about the origins of MireLurks. After all, you have the traditional crab-like MireLurks, but then you have the MireLurk kings, which look totally different, and then you have MireLurk hunters, which resemble lobsters more than they resemble crabs. In this video, I'll go over some of what we know about MireLurks, and then talk about some of the real-world animals that supposedly resemble them according to the lore. After that, we should be able to figure out or speculate about what MireLurks actually are. So I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and start. As far as creatures and the lore itself is concerned, MireLurks are a Bethesda Game Studios creation, and don't appear in the original Fallout games made by Interplay. And as alluded to earlier, MireLurks are among some of the most bizarre creatures that the player can encounter in Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and even to a lesser extent in Fallout New Vegas, because they're called lake lurks in that game. At first glance, it would appear that MireLurks appear to be a form of mutated crab. However, you can also encounter creatures that seem to resemble what possibly may be mutated frogs, as well as mutated lobsters and other types of semi-aquatic life forms. On top of that, it's also worth mentioning that MireLurks tend to have different appearances throughout the various games. In Fallout 3, MireLurks are mostly bipedal monsters that have crab-like pincers and a big carapace-like shell on their backs. In Fallout 4, they have multiple sets of legs and overall tend to look more natural, to where you can see that crabs or other crustaceans appear to have been their ancestors. On some level, these differences can be attributed to different artistic interpretations, much like how Power Armor transitioned into being more of a mech suit for Fallout 4, where in previous games it was more like a regular suit of armor. At the same time, Fallout 4's MireLurk Hunter is far different from Fallout 3's MireLurk Hunter, and the MireLurk King from Fallout 4 is different from Fallout 3's MireLurk Kings and New Vegas' Lake Lurks. So for the purposes of this video, and to help prevent some confusion, I will be discussing the different species of MireLurk that appear in Fallout 4. And for right now, I'm mostly going to be discussing what we know about the crab-like, and to a lesser extent, the lobster-like variants of MireLurks that appear in Fallout 4. According to some terminals in the Nahant Oceanological Society, or NOS in Fallout 4, a team of researchers appear to have observed some mutations in both crabs and lobsters due to radioactive exposure during the pre-war era. Specifically, the NOS observed a 14% average mass increase in crabs and a 12% average mass increase for lobsters. So on some level, it appears that MireLurks as we know them in the Fallout games may have possibly existed in some form during the pre-war era. Granted, I doubt they were as big as they are in the Fallout games, but you can certainly start to see how some level of mutation due to exposure may have led to the MireLurks that we've all encountered in a playthrough or two. In Fallout 3, the Enclave also appeared to have some data on MireLurks as well. According to a field entry terminal on MireLurks, MireLurks appear to have come from two different types of crabs. The first being the Atlantic horseshoe crab, and the second being the Atlantic blue crab. The Enclave field entry goes on to mention that some form of mutation must have occurred. However, there is little explanation as to why there are two different types of DNA from two different species of animal. If you think about it, the resemblance between both creatures appear in MireLurks. After all, the pincers that you might see on a blue crab appear on the MireLurk, and MireLurks also appear to have also inherited the dome-like carapace or shell that is commonly seen on a horseshoe crab. As a brief aside, MireLurks from Fallout 3 are characterized in-game with the name of CHELICERATA HORRENDUS. It's interesting to note that the SCYLLA is also a real species of crab, more commonly referred to as the mud crab. Now, while it's unclear whether crab-like MireLurks possess CHELICERATA DNA, we can speculate that the CHELICERATA HORRENDUS name is an homage of sorts to the mud crabs that can appear in the Elder Scrolls Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, which are two other games developed by Bethesda. Otherwise, we don't really know a whole lot about the other variants of MireLurks. According to the Fallout Wiki, the MireLurk King from Fallout 3 or Lake Lurks from Fallout New Vegas are based around snapping turtles. However, when you actually look at these creatures in Fallout 4, they tend to look more like frogs. MireLurk hunters are more like lobsters in Fallout 4 compared to Fallout 3, and MireLurk queens from Fallout 4 look far different from Fallout 3's SwampLurk queens. What does seem to be consistent is how these creatures attack, as MireLurk queens tend to always use acid, while MireLurk kings always appear to attack with sonar. The vast majority of MireLurks across Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 are arthropods. Now, arthropods can consist of various types of creatures, including centipedes, crabs, lobsters, insects, spiders, and many more. But the common themes that you will see with these types of creatures is that they are invertebrates with exoskeletons. And for our purposes, most crabs and lobsters in particular are what are known as decapod crustaceans. Decapods are simply crustaceans that have 10 legs, though they can sometimes have more appendages than that. If you look at a fair number of MireLurks, you will begin to notice that many of them tend to have about 10 or so appendages in Fallout 4. The Atlantic blue crab has 10 pairs of appendages, 8 of which are legs, while 2 of them are meant to help capture or eat food. Interestingly, while horseshoe crabs are also arthropods, they are classified as CHELICERATA, which are different from crustaceans, and this makes them more similar to arachnids like spiders and scorpions. Though, just like decapod crustaceans, horseshoe crabs also have 5 pairs of legs, where most spiders have 4 pairs of legs. It also appears that reproduction of MireLurks may be a little more consistent with horseshoe crabs, since female horseshoe crabs do tend to be larger, and perhaps multiple male MireLurks end up fertilizing a large number of eggs that are laid by just one female. Though with this said, female horseshoe crabs are only slightly larger than male ones, and it would seem like MireLurks also share some consistencies with ant colonies, where you have a single queen that's massive and lays all of the eggs, and several other worker drones that protect the colony. My point is, neither Atlantic blue crabs or horseshoe crabs have a noticeable and enlarged queen, like we've seen with Fallout 4's MireLurks. However, there are also MireLurk kings, which don't really represent arthropods at all, nor do they have the 10 or more legs that we might see in most crabs, lobsters, and other similar animals. Instead, MireLurk kings appear to have just 4 legs, and biologically speaking, don't even seem related to MireLurks at all. Yet, at the same time, they seem to occasionally appear alongside MireLurks and seem to have possibly co-evolved with their more traditional crab-like MireLurk counterparts. In nature, different species of animals are capable of having symbiotic relationships, where one or both species benefit from being in close proximity. One of the best examples of this is how clownfish and sea anemones benefit one another. Clownfish can eat small creatures, and the fecal matter that clownfish produce helps the sea anemone. And in the reverse direction, the sea anemone helps protect the clownfish by giving the clownfish a great place to hide and through its ability to sting other creatures. With this said, there are also other symbiotic relationships between creatures where one benefits and the other doesn't. This is called commensalism, and perhaps a good example of this would be how birds sometimes tend to live in trees, as the bird benefits from living in a tree, however the tree doesn't necessarily benefit from the bird. What's even more mystifying are how certain MireLurks attack. While MireLurks have fairly standard attacks in the sense that they simply attack with their claws or pincers, MireLurk hunters and queens can fire poison projectiles, while MireLurk kings can attack with some form of sonar pulse. In nature, the use of projectiles as a defensive mechanism among various animals and creatures is very uncommon. With this said, there are a number of invertebrates, and even a few arthropods that do emit semi-corrosive substances. And I suppose a great example would be the bombardier beetle, which emits a chemical spray to ward off predators. And there's also the spitting spider, which spits webbing that is both sticky and toxic to the point where the fluids can disable their prey. However, as far as I'm aware, there aren't really any crabs or lobsters that can actually make use of poison-based projectile attacks. I would say this is mostly because projectile-based poison attacks wouldn't be as useful in the water. At the very least, water would definitely limit the poisonous spray's potential range. As for attacking with sonics like the MireLurk King does, there is an arthropod known as the pistol shrimp that can emit these types of attacks from its claw. The pistol shrimp can actually kill small marine life with this effect, and if there are enough pistol shrimp in a particular area, it can actually throw off military sonar. In general, sonar pulses produced by most Navy ships can be powerful enough to kill humans because the vibrations could ripple a person's lungs. However, it's worth mentioning that sonar works best in the water, and the pistol shrimp is a creature that doesn't live on land, where sonar-based attacks don't tend to work as well. So as far as animal projectile-based attacks go, it seems like both of these types of attacks are plausible. However, MireLurk Kings would probably be most effective in water, while poison attacks seem like they would be most effective on land. But to answer the question posed in this video's title, what are MireLurks, and how can we explain kings, queens, and hunters? If you ask me, based on what we know so far, MireLurks have to be the product of both radiation exposure and genetic manipulation by humans. In other words, perhaps it's fair to suggest that MireLurks are a form of irradiated GMO, or irradiated genetically modified organism. Think about it for a second. Why would the Enclave find genetic material from two entirely different species of animal in the same organism? And how could that occur in nature? After all, as stated before, horseshoe crabs and Atlantic blue crabs are entirely different animals, and horseshoe crabs are technically not even considered to be crustaceans like most crabs or lobsters. For those of you that don't know, Atlantic blue crabs are commonly caught and eaten on the east coast of the United States. Horseshoe crabs are also harvested for their blood, which contains a unique compound known as LIMULUS AMEBOCYTE lysate, which is used by the pharmaceutical industry. Perhaps the FDA equivalent in the Fallout universe desired to create some kind of GMO which had the attributes of both being good to eat as well as to have a very plentiful resource of the LIMULUS AMEBOCYTE lysate compound. Currently in the real world, the horseshoe crab is considered to be vulnerable to extinction, due in large part to how much of its native habitat has been destroyed. And given to how important the LAL compound is for medical testing, it's likely that scientists in the Fallout universe would have liked to create a GMO that could be easily raised in a lab so the compound could be extracted from the animals. Perhaps whatever GMO was created by the FDA and pharmaceutical industries is the precursor to the post-war MireLurk in the Fallout universe. However, much of its medical application has been lost due in large part to radiation exposure. It's also possible that these GMO creatures were once again modified in the post-war era. This may be the reason that they obtained the ability to shoot acid at would-be threats, or how they grew so large in size. What would be more interesting to know is if someone did genetically modify them further in the post-war era, who did so and why did they do it? After all, as far as I'm aware, there are no crabs or lobsters that make use of poisons, nor are there reptiles or frogs that are capable of producing sound-based projectiles for defensive purposes. What is more difficult to explain, simply because we don't have more information, is why MireLurks themselves seem to compromise several different species. After all, common MireLurks seem to look radically different from MireLurk hunters. However, MireLurk hunters seem somewhat similar to queens, and then MireLurk kings might as well be an entirely different species. When you think of the name MireLurk and separate the word mire, mire is a word that's often used to refer to a swamp, and then the word lurk is a verb which, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, means, quote, to lie in wait in a place of concealment. When you combine these together, you start to realize that the name MireLurk may have come into origin among wastelanders simply because MireLurks have a tendency to appear when you least expect it, especially while traveling through swamplands on the North American East Coast. In that sense, perhaps the Wastelanders simply just call them MireLurks because both the standard drone-like MireLurks, the MireLurk Hunters, MireLurk Queens, and MireLurk Kings are all very dangerous to encounter and seem to associate with one another. That, and I somehow doubt that there are very many studied biologists in the wasteland, let alone those that have a thorough understanding of how each creature interacts. At the end of the day, I think that MireLurks are just a generic term to describe what is actually a wide variety of species that can be encountered by wastelanders around swamps. And because certain animals and creatures of different species appear to cohabitate these areas and have some kind of symbiotic relationship, wastelanders have come to call all of them MireLurks. As for their origins, I would suspect that they may have originally come from some kind of genetic modification in the pre-war era, further enhanced by some kind of radiation exposure, and possibly even additional genetic manipulation in the post-war era by some unknown entity. This seems possible since the Institute managed to introduce super mutants to the Commonwealth, despite the fact that the Commonwealth doesn't have any other notable sources of FEV. Hopefully, we will find out more about MireLurks in the next Fallout game. But alright guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.